and I wrote a note to Samuel Beckett saying, my name is John Minahan, I work for a newspaper, but I understand your aversion to being photographed, but I have been photographing my hometown of Thigh in County Kildare for 18 years. It was at that point, and I have a sequence of photographs I'd like to show you. Amongst them, of course, was that sequence underway. Now, in the 10 years that prior to meeting Beckett, because you don't just photograph Beckett, you offer him something. Beckett loved the face, he loved the voice. And I had, at that point, known enough about Sam prior to the 10 years. I'd seen some productions, and the opportunity, and on the journey things do happen. There are no accidents. Sometimes things, do happen. And I left this note, anyway, for Mr. Beckett, and the next day I phoned up, and I was put directly to his room, which was room 604, the Hyde Park Hotel, and we agreed to meet the following day at 9 o'clock.
And she's still working on me to change my mind about not going to the youth club tonight, though she's wasting her breath. Besides anything else, I have sprouted a crop of zits on my face. Most of them congregating on my greasy chin. Although there is also one on my forehead that would be the envy of any unicorn. I also feel a bit odd today. I can't quite pin it down, but it's kind of like being poorly, except I'm not actually sick, I don't think. I ate and I'm cranky, no doubt about that. Sunshine will help clear the spots up, according to the oracle beside me. But it really has got its work cut out for it today. I am Zitzville, US of A.
So where does the name Crossguns come from? I've heard some very fanciful descriptions of how the name Crossguns came to be applied to Crossguns Bridge. One of them was that soldiers, when they were marching with dead colleagues to Glasnevin Cemetery, used to put their guns into reverse. But really the names, you know the way that's sort of a mourning where the guns are reversed. But really the name comes from a tavern that was, as taverns in those days very often were, at a crossroads. And the crossroads is very well known to all of us. It's the V there at Hart's Corner.
Beckett, 1984, directing his masterpiece. The man at the bottom, looking adoringly at the author, is Walter Asmus, one of who Beckett actually had huge respect for to direct his work in Germany. but you see Sam there, and he's like, and somewhere in and amongst that audience there on this particular time was Maeve Binchy. And
our piece was published in the Irish Times republished it a few weeks ago, didn't they?
That's right. And earlier on, before you came in, I got to know Maeve in 1971 when I think Dermot asked me a question. I said about ABBA, which was strange how things happen again. But Maeve Binchy was in Brighton when ABBA won the European, what's it called? Eurovision Song Contest. And after there was there was always a party at the press tent in the pavilion, and there was a lot of voices there. About 2:30 in the morning, I heard this wonderful Dublin accent saying, "Is anybody going back to London?" And of course, there was a lot of people around, and nobody really took much interest in Maeve. But I was Irish, and this was like music to me. "I'm going back." "Oh, grand." It was the first time we heard the word grand, "Where are you going?" "I won't put you out." She couldn't have been more correct. I said, "Well, actually, I was then living in Hammersmith, virtually where she was living in Hammersmith. I dropped her off, and we became friends. And I remember about a month after I dropped her off, she wrote a piece in the Irish Times calling me the photo essayist of a thigh. So that was our first introduction. And it's always had, like Maeve, but she was always gracious whenever I saw her,
It was the second, at least, to diverge slightly, my favourite. Maeve phoned me around 3 weeks before she died, and I was incredibly shocked when I heard news of her death. But Maeve's most interesting lift, apart from your obviously wonderful lift from Brighton back to London, was in Dublin, in the airport in those days, it was impossible to get taxis. Because there were so few taxis in Dublin, and there were these massive queues, and she came in on the last flight to London, was delayed, and there was a taxi driver leaving with 2 Americans in the car, and he looked and he pulled up right down the queue where Maeve was, and he said to the 2 Americans, "Do you mind if I give my daughter a lift home?" They were going to Killiney, and Maeve lived in Dorky Village there beside the pub, And so Maeve had to get in and pretend to be his daughter for the entire trip home and chat away about home life and mother and everything else. And it was the way that Maeve was loved by people in Dublin, that art taxi driver would do this. Finally, they got to Polyvilla where Maeve lived, and as she was getting out of the taxi, and because she couldn't pay him or anything, or make any tip, because obviously she was his daughter, he leaned over and gave her a big slap on the backside and said, "Now tell your mother to have the bed nice and warm."
Yeah. They seek him there. His clothes are loud, but never square. It will make or break him, so he's got to buy the best, 'cause he's a dedicated follower of fashion. And when he does his little rounds round the boutiques of London town, eagerly pursuing all the latest fads and trends, 'cause he's a dedicated follower of fashion. Oh yes he is. Oh yes he is. Oh yes he is. Oh yes he is. He thinks he is a flower to be looked at, and when he pulls his frilly nylon panties right up tight, he feels a dedicated follower of fashion. Oh yes he is. Oh yes he is. Oh yes he is. Oh yes he is.
why has Dracula remained so famous? And I suppose it's the fear element, first of all, fear and terror. And it still has it to a certain extent. And the famous movie director Alfred Hitchcock once said, we all love to be in our toe in the cold water of fear. And that's exactly what you do with Dracula. You'll chance it, you'll say, oh, Jesus, why did I do this? Or what if, end up as a mentor? Anything you get involved in this, a bit on the scale side. And we didn't get down to where the story came from. Who or what is Dracula? Now, I want to go through a number of reasons, and my strong arguments are that the Dracula story is Irish, and Irish only.
So I was sent straight down to this kindergarten, and I was the first photographer there, and I knocked the door. Somebody came out, and I wanted to speak to Diana Spencer, and I just said, listen, I'd like to take a photograph of Lady Diana, if possible. Oh, and she came out, how would you want? And obviously working in the kindergarten, this is the training of the photographer. You know, you want her, and you want her with kids. This is why I say something, a young photographer is going to photograph a writer, read one of his books. So she came out, and she had to get permission from two of the children that she was going to be photographed with, and that came to pass. And I just remember that early morning, about 7:45 or something, and the light, again with cameras there, was a Nikon 35mm, it was 3x film. I've always used the same film. And it's, when you look, and again it's about looking at light. I mean, when I look at people here, I look at what's around them, because that's the way I like to, see my work. And I'm looking at her through the viewfinder, and I see her legs completely illuminated, this vivacious, bubbly teenager. And it's just amazing. And I just know at that point there's something very special.